We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
The Christmas season is here, and with it a time to reflect on the year just gone by. Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special edition, we're going to find out what were the big stories, the big issues, and the big surprises that rocked 2024, and cast an eye to the future. Remember, Liberty Nation Radio is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Today we're very fortunate to have with us Liberty Nation's executive editor, Lisa K. Donner. Lisa, looking forward to Christmas?
Hi, Mark. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas indeed. It's great to have you on, and I do appreciate it. Now, this time of year, I think the most important thing to do, especially as we are coming up to Christmas Day, is to look back and reflect. And I'd like to do that, but on the political and cultural level with you today, Lisa. So let's start off with a nice, easy question for you. What's the most memorable aspect of 2024?
Well, I call this the year of the rise of the Sons of Liberty. Sorry. Oops. I know you're broadcasting from the UK, but Americans really made themselves known. They pushed back against a number of leftist narratives. And when you look back at the American Revolution, the overwhelming force didn't make Americans shrink. It inspired them. And I think the American people were inspired this year to make their voice heard.
Yeah, it seems that there was a growing current of inspiration under the, what's the best way to say this? Bubbling underneath the surface of the Overton window, bubbling to either side of the Overton window, I think is the more accurate way to say it because of the shift that we've seen. But I think part of that may have come from a vacuum in leadership. Now, we've obviously seen since Donald Trump won the election, Joe Biden's really taken a back seat to everything. But for those of us who have been following the White House for the last year, we've seen Joe Biden essentially already checked out for a long, long time in terms of his cognitive ability, in terms of his energy, in terms of his willingness to actually fight for something beyond whatever happens to be the meal du jour in Congress. And so people were actually kind of desperate for a bit of leadership, or at least a figurehead, so they could bring themselves forward. And that's why I think they voted for Donald Trump in such numbers.
Well, this is the lamest lame duck I've seen in a long time, maybe since the years of Jimmy Carter, and that shows you how far I go back. But Mark, you have to consider that this was a most unusual year in American politics. It really was. I mean, we had 2 assassination attempts. We had a last-minute major party candidate turnover, which has really never happened before. The pardon of a president's son, which is kind of unusual. Just loads of crazy stuff, But the American people decided to make known what they wanted. They were not buying the leftist narrative. And I think we're seeing the decline of the leftist narrative in a number of areas. Let's start with lawfare.
Yeah, lawfare is a big one. It's really the first time, and I'm not going to use those hated, dreaded words, unprecedented.
No, this is an unprecedented free zone, right?
Yeah, we do know.
Because practically nothing is unprecedented.
Absolutely. I mean, I reserve the right to use it if aliens come down and land on the White House lawn. But other than that, we do stay away from the term unprecedented. But it was really becoming apparent that the forces of the left, whether that's the political forces or the legal forces, were out to get Donald Trump. Now, how do we know they were out to get Trump? Well, they said they were on the campaign trail. And to charge him and find him guilty of things that have never before been a crime, where the alleged victims of the crimes, we would want to enter, and these being the banks, we would want to enter the same business arrangements again. That was the civil one in New York. But I think it just laid bare that there's a vindictive streak in American politics. and it was coming from the political left. And because of that, they were roundly rejected.
Well, there were 91 indictments.
Mm.
And I think when America and the American people woke up is when all the FBI and et cetera, surrounded Mar-a-Lago and went in there and rummaged through Mrs. Trump's drawers and everything in between. I think that just went over the top, and the sensibilities of the American people were that this was not appropriate, no matter who or how much you dislike someone. It was an inappropriate use of force. And those 91 indictments, even, though some juries came back with a guilty verdict, the American people just were not buying it.
Mm. Yeah, it really put a lie to the idea of just, there's only one justice, and it's the same justice across the board. Because we've seen that injustices are not punished. We've seen that so much this last year. And I think an interesting case in point is the recent Daniel Penny acquittal. Now, there's a lot of legal experts speaking publicly saying that shouldn't have been, he shouldn't have even been prosecuted for that, because there was actually, we had Mehdi Hassan, I think it was, who is a prominent contributor on MSNBC, or was. And he was saying, imagine if Jordan Neely had been white, and what kind of reaction would we have had? And the fact actually is, for anybody who can do more than a minute's research before forming an opinion, is that there was in New York a very, very similar situation just a short time before the Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely one, where there was an aggressive, I believe it was a white man, on the subway, and he got stabbed by a black Good Samaritan trying to protect people. And he wasn't charged, didn't spend a day in jail. And so people can see that there is a very politically motivated lawfare system in place that favors the current narrative, the current progressive narrative of victims and oppressors.
Yeah, and Americans don't like that. I mean,
no, nobody likes that, right?
The more the British taxed them, the more they said enough, and they were willing to risk everything they had. And I think there were a lot of Americans before the election that were just kind of keeping quiet. I wrote a story that, there weren't that many lawn signs this year in some parts of the nation. And people just weren't letting it known who they were going to vote for. But then when it was voting day, when it was time to count the returns, they were quite clear. It was an undisputable win for Donald Trump. It was not a landslide, but it was certainly clear and convincing. And ever since then, I think the American people have said enough with, especially like you were just talking about the Daniel Penny case. The race hustlers came out the next day and started screaming for this, that, and the other and threatening. I don't think that's going to go anywhere.
No, I suspect that the progressive orthodoxy might be on its last legs, and that more than anything is something I'm grateful for this Christmas season, Lisa.
Well, the political winds were certainly blowing Donald Trump's way. I mean, look at those 2 assassination attempts. Wow.
Yeah, it is funny though that they were kind of disappeared from the pages of the media so quickly. When it's something, I mean, this is a former president, potential next president at the time. And what did we see? We saw doubts. Was he hit by a chip from the teleprompter?
Oh, right.
Things like this. And I mean, it was fairly disgusting behavior because they disliked the man. They're willing to sacrifice not just the truth, but or any respectability that they may have once had. And we've seen that again more recently with the shooting of the healthcare CEO.
But again, Mark, you have to say Americans weren't buying it. They just weren't buying this phony teleprompter thing. They saw the ear, and anybody who would do that, raise their fist in the air after being shot, coming within a quarter of an inch of being completely annihilated. I think it really inspired a lot of Americans. Now, some on the left, were constantly pushing against him, but I think people were paying attention to their pocketbooks, not what they were saying about inflation. Oh, inflation is getting better. Well, then they go to the grocery store and they're thinking to themselves, yeah, like for who?
It's amazing the how little the legacy media talked about how just because inflation's coming down now, it doesn't mean that all the cumulative inflation is not still there. It just means that things are getting more expensive less quickly. Anyway, that's my bugbear for the whole year, is the lack of information about inflation. We're going to be back with Lisa K. Donna after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.